tip-top evening to all you Gnostics, out-and-outers, and Knights of the Brush and Moon. I'm your host, Finn J.D. John, welcoming you to the Penny Dreadful Chaffing Crib. It's a Sunday night, and that means it's time once again for the Penny Dreadful Hour podcast. So, slip off your flyers and put up your dew-beaters, top off your tumblers with something hot and strong, and prick up your lugs because another rare hour-long noggin of early Victorian prattlery is upon us like Dick Turpin on a traveling fancy toff. The Penny Dreadful Hour is the show that carries you back to the sooty, foggy streets of early Victorian London when the latest batch of the story papers hit the streets. Not the fancy ones full of sketches by Boz and comments about Parliament, but the cheap, scrappy ones that cost a penny and the ones that the beaks and the town tabbies call penny bloods or penny dreadfuls. Tonight is a special one in the young history of the Penny Dreadful Hour podcast. This is episode 1 of season 3. It's with this episode that we have finally gotten the format down, and I am finally ready to start spreading the word about the show, and we're recommending that new listeners tune in starting with this episode. So, I need to explain a few things here for the benefit of new listeners. The Penny Dreadful Hour podcast comes 3 times a week, with a 1-hour show on Sunday nights and a half-hour show on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Each episode is anchored by one chapter reading from one of the 7 Penny Dreadful stories that we are following. The Mysteries of London from 1844, Varney the Vampire from 1845, Sweeney Todd from 1846, The Black Band from 1861, Highwayman Dick Turpin, also from 1861, Spring-Heeled Jack from 1866, and Rose Mortimer or the Ballet-Girl'S Revenge from 1867. The Sunday show also includes a Victorian-age ghost story of a short story type. And this, of course, today is the main Sunday show, which I keep clean enough for everyone to appreciate, and if you're up for some Old English ghost stories and occult nuggets, this is where you'll find them. If you're interested in the spicy bits, as spicy as we get around here, bawdy song lyrics is about as porny as we go, but you'll find those in our Tuesday shows. And for all you Victorian-age murderinos that want to see some true crime from the 1860s, well, you'll find all the murder, war crimes, and deeds of blood in the Thursday night shows. So here's what we've got in store for tonight. We'll start things off with a ghostly palate cleanser, an article from the Terrific Register, a truly dreadful and shocking publication full of murders and ghost stories from the 1820s. It was, by the way, a regular weekly favorite of Charles Dickens when he was a young lad. On Sundays, we look for the spooky stuff from the Register, leaving the gruesome death tales for Thursdays. Next comes Chapter 6 of Rose Mortimer or the Ballet-Girl'S Revenge by an anonymous comedy writer from the Theatre Royal on Drury Lane, which first started publication in 1867. After that, we'll explore a little lowbrow poetry from one of the Flash Cant songs about highway robbers and pickpockets and other fun stuff, courtesy of one of the supper club songbooks of the 1830s and 1840s. Then, following a short break, we'll have our weekly Victorian ghost story. It's a spectacular little tale titled An Account of Some Strange Disturbances in Ongier Street by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, first published in 1851. It's long, so we're going to have to split it into 3 parts, the first this week, the second next week, and the third the week after that. And we'll finish out today's program with a little something allegedly funny or witty in the form of an article from an early Victorian popular comedy magazine like Punch or Fun. Sound like a good time? Trust me, it will be. Let's kick it off, as promised, with an article from the Terrific Register. This nugget was first published in the early 1820s. Here we go. Fatal fulfillment of a nativity of his son cast by Dryden. Dryden, with all his understanding, was weak enough to be attached to judicial astrology, and always used to calculate the nativity of his children. When his lady was in labor with his son Charles, he being told that it was decent to withdraw, laid his watch on the table and begging one of the ladies then present in a very grave manner to take notice of the exact minute of the child's birth, which she observed and acquainted him therewith. About a week after, when his lady was pretty well recovered, Mr. Dryden took occasion to tell her that he had been calculating the child's nativity and observed with grief that he was born in an evil hour, for Jupiter, Venus, and the sun were all under the earth, and the Lord of the Ascendant afflicted with a hateful square of Mars and Saturn. If he live to the 8th year, continued he will go near to die a violent death on his birthday. But if he should then escape, of which I see but little hope, he will in his 23rd year be under the same evil direction. And if he should then also escape, the 33rd or 34th year is, I fear—" Here he was interrupted by the immoderate grief of his lady, who could no longer hear so much calamity prophesied to befall her son. The time at last came, and August was the inauspicious month in which the young Dryden was to enter into the 8th year of his age. Dryden being at leisure to leave town, he was invited to the country seat of the Earl of Berkshire, his brother-in-law, to spend the long vacation with him at Charlton in Wilts, his lady going at the same time on a visit to pass the remaining part of the summer at her uncle Mordaunt's. When they came to divide their children, the lady wished him to take his son John with him and let her have Charles. But Dryden was too absolute, and they parted in anger. He took Charles with him, and she was obliged to be content with John. When the fatal day arrived, the anxiety of the lady's spirits caused her such an effervescence of blood as threw her into so violent a fever that her life was despaired of, till a letter came from Dryden reproving her for her womanish credulity and assuring her that her child was well, which revived her spirits, and in 6 weeks after she received an éclaircissement of the whole affair. Dryden, either through fear of being reckoned superstitious or thinking it a science beneath his study, was extremely cautious of letting anyone know that he was a dealer in astrology. Therefore he could not excuse his absence on his son's birthday from a hunting match which Earl Berkshire had made, to which all the neighboring gentlemen were invited. When he went out, he took care to set his son a double exercise in the Latin tongue, which he taught his children himself, with a strict charge not to stir out of the room till his return, well knowing that the task with which he had set him would take him a longer time than he would be absent from him. Charles was performing his exercise in obedience to his father's command when, as ill fate would have it, the stag made toward the house, and the noise alarming the servants, they hastened out to see the sport. One of them, taking young Dryden by the hand, led him out along with them, when, just as they came to the gate, the stag, being at bay with the dogs, made a bold push and leaped over the court wall, which, being low and very old, the dogs followed, threw down a part thereof, and poor Charles was buried in the ruins. He was presently got out, but much bruised, so that he languished for 6 weeks in a very dangerous way, which accomplished the first part of his father's prophecy. In his 23rd year, being at Rome, he fell from the top of an old tower belonging to the Vatican, occasioned by a swimming in his head with which he was seized by the heat of the weather. He recovered this also, but ever after remained in a languishing sickly state till the 33rd year of his age, when being returned to England he was drowned at Windsor, being taken with the cramp as he was bathing in the Thames with another gentleman, to whom he called for assistance, but too late. Thus the father's prophetical calculation proved but too true. And now 'tis time for Chapter 6 of Rose Mortimer, or almost time. Because this is the recommended starting point for new listeners, I'm going to take a little time here to bring everyone up to speed on the plot from this penny dreadful. Bear with me, this will be worth the few minutes it will take. Long-time listeners, feel free to skip ahead to the reading. I'll mark the time signature in the show notes for you. Or simply skip ahead exactly 9 minutes from right here. If you're new here, you're going to love this one. In Chapter 1, we open on noble, virtuous young Rose being physically accosted on a deserted street, apparently for dishonorable purposes, by a debauched parson. The parson is Abel Booth. She screams and screams, but no one comes, and just as it seems she is about to be ravished, a bearded gentleman steps up and punches Abel out. This is Jack Halliday, a scene painter at the ballet. Abel wakes up a moment later, and he and Jack snarl at each other a little bit, and Jack is ready to give him another Hertz donut, but Rose begs him not to. Jack walks her back to her home as Abel glares after her, cursing her and swearing that by all the devils in hell she shall yet be mine. Pro tip: if your parson swears by all the devils in hell, you might consider switching churches. In Chapter 2, we open in Rose's home, which she shares with her father, Hugh Mortimer. We learn that he is a brute and a criminal, specifically a forger of banknotes, and that Abel Booth is able to get him transported to Australia at any time. We gather that he is holding back doing so because he wants Rose. Her father is angry with her for fleeing from him and yells at her for weeping. Then someone shows up to visit, and Rose's father orders her out of the room. The newcomer is a tall, dark stranger with a fabulous mustache, whom we will soon learn is Count Lerno. He is here to buy some counterfeit banknotes from Hugh, but Hugh tries to renege on their deal. Count Lerno grabs him by the throat, threatens him with a revolver, throws him to the floor, and leaves the room with all the banknotes, only paying him half the agreed-upon sum. On his way out the door, he locks eyes with Rose and stares wolfishly at her. We are given to understand that he is marking her for conquest. In Chapter 3, Rose goes back to the theater to try again to talk her way into a showbiz job. Just as she is being repulsed, Jack Halliday appears and squires her to the manager's door, past the screeners. She is conveyed into the manager's presence. The manager is there with another man in the room. He tells her to get lost, but just then the other man turns around and, hey, it's Count Lerno. Count Lerno, of course, urges the manager to take Rose on. The manager does. As she is leaving, she tells Jack Halliday of her good fortune, and he is delighted but warns her not to trust Count Lerno. Back home, Rose sees Abel Booth leaving her apartment. Entering, she asks her father what Abel was doing, and Hugh realizes Abel was spying on him. Hugh clearly knows some kind of showdown is coming, and he blames Rose for it.
It is your namby-pamby modesty that has brought this evil down on me.
Apparently, she was supposed to allow Abel Booth to ravish her the previous day, and he is now angry because she did not. Now, looking out the window, he sees Abel Booth and two other men on the sidewalk looking up at them. Hugh knows this means the hour has come, so he orders Rose up into her room upstairs and locks her in, and he gets an old-fashioned pistol out of a hidden cubby in the floor. Rose shivers upstairs. She smells smoke and fears the house is on fire, but it goes away and she realizes it's just Hugh burning some evidence. Then someone starts pounding on the door, and being unanswered, they force it open and come in. There's a pistol shot, a shriek of pain and terror and scuffling and fighting, and then silence. Rose uses a fire iron to pry up some of the flooring and peep through into the room below, but loses her balance and falls through, landing in a heap in the room below. The room is covered with blood in great pools. Then someone chuckles fiendishly. It's Abel Booth. He's in her room upstairs, having let himself in, apparently with a key, obviously hoping to find her there, alone and defenseless. As he drops down into the room, she runs for the door and out of the house and runs she knows not whither until she drops fainting from exhaustion against a doorpost someplace. Chapter 4 opens on Count Lerno in his drawing room. The Count, we learn, came to England 2 years before. Nobody knows from whence, but he's handsome and well-bred and rich and throws great gambling parties, so he's been accepted into high society. Tonight we see him in formal evening dress in his drawing room steaming open some packs of playing cards so that he can mark the backs. Then we cut to the party that night. He is hosting a number of nobles and notables, including one Captain Roper, who is slightly suspected of having thrown a race in which a horse he owned was running, which should have won but did not, and a young baronet named Sir Harold King. As the evening progresses, we observe that Sir Harold, who just inherited a fortune, is the mark who is being fleeced, and we more than suspect that Captain Roper and Count Lerno are in cahoots to do it. But Captain Roper overdoes it, and Sir Harold gets suspicious and starts closely watching him. Then he pounces, seizes his sleeve, and accuses him of cheating. Captain Roper, infuriated, leaps to the wall where a pair of rapiers are hanging, throws one to Sir Harold, and makes a pass. A short, fierce sword fight ensues, ending when Captain Roper is disarmed, but still furious, he grabs a revolver off the wall, which Count Lerno had earlier told him he kept loaded, and fires point blank at his opponent. Unfortunately for him, Count Lerno had lied. The revolver was not loaded, but the other gamblers, though cool with a duel, find attempted murder to be a bridge too far and pounce on him. When they do, the missing card falls out of his waistcoat. The Count orders him to leave, but on his way out he vows revenge and insinuates that the Count is also tricksy. The Count pounces upon him, horsewhips him, and ejects him from the room. The other gamblers also mizzle off, saying they're done for the night, and leaving the Count muttering to himself.
"The first brick of the house has fallen," he mutters. "The secret of my life is no longer safe."
He must make his escape before it all comes down, but, he determines, before he does so, He's going to make a conquest of Rose.
"No, Rose," he mutters, "nothing in heaven or earth can save thee. Thou shalt be mine, thou shalt be mine. Mwahahaha."
Curtain. In Chapter 5, we're back to Rose. She's waking up from her swoon with the help of a policeman, and there's a crowd of onlookers around her. Among them is Jack Halliday, the scene painter who takes her back to her home in a cab, but there's no sign of her father or anyone. Jack asks her if she might be willing to stay with his mother while she figures out what to do, and after meeting Mrs. Halliday, she gladly takes them up on the offer. Meanwhile, they share what they know with Scotland Yard and hope to hear news of Hugh Mortimer's fate soon. Thus passes a week by. Rose takes to the ballet very nicely, and Mr. Flathers is soon very glad he acceded to Count Lerno's request to take her on. The ballet master, Mr. Tots, is enraptured. "That girl will make a wonderful dancer," he tells Flathers. "She's a Cerrito, she's an Elsler, she's a Taglioni, she's a Carlotta. Keep her, and she'll make your fortune and her own, too." Mr. Flathers' reply, though, is a little chilling. "I wish I could. I wish I were not in that atrocious villain's power. Poor girl, if she only knew what misery is in store for her." Time flies. The show goes on. Count Lerno comes around a lot and pays a lot of attention to Rose. Despite Jack Halliday's warning, she feels she must be civil to him as she owes him her job and maybe her life, but she still mistrusts him. The Christmas performance comes, and Rose is cast as Goddess of Mourning. She's the star of the show. But in the audience, the Count is muttering encouragement to himself.
"It cannot fail. She cannot suspect."
Then, after the show, he approaches her to tell her he has a message from her father, and if she will come with him, he will take her to him. She accepts the offer, but something tells her not all is what it seems. She stands there by his coach, trying to think of a reason to bow out, considering even running from him. But then Jack Halliday appears in the distance, and the Count seizes Rose, bundles her into the waiting coach, and is off with her to a magnificent palatial estate. Rose is increasingly alarmed. Her father never moved in such circles. She demands the Count take her to her father. Instead, the Count informs her that he has deceived her and taken her to his estate, the mistress of which he hopes she will consent to be. She, of course, refuses, so he seizes her again, bears her up the stairs, and locks her in a bedroom. Clearly he plans to return shortly and probably to try to force himself upon her. She runs to the window, opens it, notices an ornamental poignard on the wall, grabs it, slashes the curtains up to make a rope, and slides down to freedom. Running away through the open country and nearly frozen to death, she finally finds a small, mean-looking house with a light burning inside. Inside are a coarse ruffian and his old hag mother. Rose asks them to shelter her till daylight. They let her in, and then the host and hostess exchange a glance, and the old hag bolts the door. That brings us to today's chapter, Chapter 6. Rose is not out of the woods yet. She's in this strange house with this ruffian and his haggish mother, and she can't help wondering if she's jumped out of one frying pan and right into another. The hag orders her to go upstairs and get some rest. She'd love to, but something tells her these two are not to be trusted, and her host keeps staring covetously at the costume jewelry bracelet that she's wearing. Is she in danger? Spoiler, yes. How will she escape from their clutches? Spoiler, just kidding, you'll have to wait and see. Starting right about now. Chapter 6. The Lonely House, the Loft, Schemes of Plunder, the Struggle in the Dark, the Fearful Leap, Terror, the Escape, the Disguise. As the door closed behind her, Rose's heart sank within her. She had escaped one danger, it is true, but was it only to encounter another? The interior of the house in which she had taken refuge was mean and shabby in the extreme, and the countenance of its inmates most repulsive. Their rough tongues seemed to find it difficult to frame courteous sentences, and polite phrases sat upon them with bad grace, though both the man and the woman, in a rude, uncouth fashion, did their best for her comfort. Her dress, alas for the poor dress, it was now much torn and mud-bespattered, was taken by the old hag to dry, but on the fair white rounded arm of the poor girl still glistened a bracelet which she had worn at the theatre the night before, and which, if of real stones, would have been worth a small kingdom. On this the eyes of the beetle-browed ruffian fixed themselves with a covetous glare. But Rose noticed him not as he stood near the dying embers of the fire, sadly thinking over the events of the past few hours.
"Come, old woman,"
cried the man in loud, harsh tones.
"Here's this here poor gal a-perishing a cold. Show her to her bedroom, can't yer?"
The old hag stared and muttered something between her teeth, but snatching up a flaring tallow candle, which stuck in the neck of an old bottle, served to light the apartment, and signaling Rose to follow her, she led the way to a ladder which was the only means of communication with the upper story. Rose shrank back. She hesitated to ascend a tumble-down ladder leading to she knew not whither.
"Go up, I tell yer,"
said the hag. "I'd rather not. No, I will stay down here till daylight."
"He says you're to go up,"
said the hag.
"and when he says a thing, he means it, he do." "Now then with that light, mother,"
cried the man with an oath.
"Up, up, quick, or it'll be the worse for you."
Rose ascended the ladder in safety and saw that she was in a sort of loft. Her head almost touched the rafters, and the floor was littered with straw.
"Lie down and go to sleep,"
said the old woman as she disappeared down the ladder, taking the light with her and leaving Rose in total darkness. For some minutes our heroine stood afraid to move a step, but as her eyes became better accustomed to the darkness, she grew bolder, and advancing to the narrow aperture which answered the purpose of a window, she looked out. The wall of the house seemed to go straight down into the water, for beneath her the ripples came sluggishly plashing, and she could just discern the dim outline of a boat moored to a stake driven deep into the mud. Her present position was fraught with peril. She could not but mistrust the inhabitants of the hut, though as yet she had no proof of their entertaining any ill feeling toward her. Wearily she turned away from the window, and gathering together an armful of straw, seated herself upon it, determined not to close her eyes. But her efforts were in vain. Exhausted nature exercised her sway, and poor Rose soon fell into a deep slumber. After a while she woke suddenly. How long she had been asleep she had no means of ascertaining, but now the faint gray light of early dawn was beginning to make things partly visible in a misty, ghost-like manner. Immediately beneath her she heard the voices of the man and woman in fierce conversation.
"I tell you yes," said the man. "I saw the jewels a-twinkling on her arm like blazes. They'd set you and me up for life, that's what they'd do." "How are you going to get 'em?" "Trust me for that. Give me a hold of that there knife."
Rose instinctively felt that she was the subject of the conversation of these wretches. She felt that her life was about to be sacrificed for a trumpery theatrical gewgaw not worth a crown. What could she do? Would they let her go if she gave them the mock diamonds? When she next heard the voices, the speakers had evidently altered their position. They had come to the bottom of the ladder leading to the loft in which she lay, pale and trembling.
"Now listen to me, mother," said the
man, with an oath.
"As soon as I've got up, you pull the ladder away so that she can't escape. You hear?" I'm not deaf," grumbled the other. "Well, you just mind what you're at, that's all."
A moment's pause, and then the sound of heavy footsteps on the creaking ladder. Rose shrank into the farthest and darkest corner of the loft as the head of the beetle-browed ruffian appeared through the trap. With the exception of a space of a few feet round the window, where the early rays of light penetrated, the loft was in complete darkness. With beating heart and bated breath, Rose watched the ruffian as for a few moments he stood near the window, a long-bladed knife held firmly between his teeth. Rose hastily put her hand into the bosom of her dress and pulled out the poignard which had rendered her such good service when escaping from the Count. It was a tiny weapon, better suited for a toy than for a death struggle, but on it rested Rose's only hope of life. With low, mumbled curses, the ruffian commenced feeling about in every direction. Rose shrank still further back. Growling to himself, he stumbled along, but without searching the corner in which our heroine was concealed. Then he suddenly paused.
"She can't have got away nohow,"
he muttered, perplexed. Then, guiding himself by the wall, he commenced making a tour of the loft. If he only persevered in this plan, Rose knew she must be discovered. Again she saw him cross the light, but it was only a momentary glimpse she obtained of him, and then he plunged again into darkness. Rose felt he was drawing near her. She felt his low muttered curses and his stealthy footfall, but how near he was she could not tell. Clutching her dagger tightly in her little hand, she scarcely dared to breathe. All was silent as the grave. She knew nothing. heard nothing of her pursuer's whereabouts till a cold, clammy hand rested on her bare shoulder. With a scream, she started from her place of concealment. With an oath and a yell of triumph, he followed her. Then, her eyes glaring fiercely like those of a tiger at bay, she turned and confronted him. With impetuous force, he rushed on and seized her by the throat. Her brain whirled round. She almost lost consciousness and sank to the ground. With a low laugh, he bent over her and raised on high the hand holding the cruel, long-bladed knife. Then only was it that Rose recovered her presence of mind sufficiently to act. Striking upward with her tiny dagger, its sharp point entered the cheek of her antagonist as he bent over her, and as he moved, started a crimson streak across his scowling face. With a frightful yell, he put up both hands, for the blood raining over his face blinded him. To do this, he was forced to relinquish his hold of Rose, who, not slow to seize this opportunity of escape, pushed him away from her with all her force and staggered to her feet. There was not a moment to lose. How was her escape to be made? The ladder was gone. Only one chance remained, the window. It was just large enough for her to squeeze through, and to her great joy she saw the tide had risen considerably, and the leap was nothing very terrific for an expert diver. Without a moment's hesitation she plunged head first into the muddy river. As she regained the surface, a few strokes took her to the boat, into which she clambered. Then, looking at the window whence she had jumped, she saw the hideous blood-stained features of her would-be murderer glaring furiously at her. Her nimble fingers speedily unfastened the rope with which the boat was moored, and then with one vigorous push she launched the frail bark out into the stream. She was only just in time, for again that ill-favored face appeared at the window, and a couple of sharp reports in quick succession from a pistol, and the sprinkling of the shot like hail in the water around her, warned her that she had no time to spare. With a few rapid strokes of the sculls, Rose took the boat still further away from land, and then directing its head down the stream, the tide being in her favor, she soon turned a bend in the river and lost sight of the hateful house. Now she had time for reflection, so unshipping her sculls, she allowed the boat to drift with the current while she endeavored to settle the course which it would be best for her to pursue. It was now nearly broad daylight, and in a few minutes she would reach the more crowded part of the river, where she would certainly attract attention, which, however flattering it might be, was not at all what she desired. While yet she pondered, her eye rested upon a bundle lying in the stern of the boat. Eagerly she seized it, and found that it contained a suit of boy's clothes, which, although somewhat too large for her, would nevertheless serve the purpose of disguise and warmth, for, be it remembered, a ballet dress, however pretty, is not exactly suited to a river excursion on a frosty December morning. Again seizing the sculls, she impelled the boat toward the shore at a part where the reed-grown bank seemed to offer the best concealment, and in a very short time emerged, looking as pretty and fragile a sailor boy as you can imagine. "I've got the boat here," she said to herself, "so I may as well float down as far as Westminster." So saying, she stepped again into the little bark, and in a few minutes was once more floating gaily down in mid-stream towards London. By and by the towers of the Houses of Parliament came in sight, and then Rose directed the skiff towards a landing-place just on the upper side of the bridge. It was yet early, and but few people were about, but some half-dozen watermen were lounging at the pier.
"Hullo, little one," cried one. "Where you hail from?"
"Likely-looking lad enough," said another.
Do better in petticoats," growled a third.
It required some little courage on the part of Rose to walk past these men, for the dress she wore was strange to her, and she much feared she might be discovered by her awkwardness.
"Here, you fellows, look after my boat,"
she said in as consequential and swaggering a tone as she could assume, and then, putting her hands into her pockets, she strolled past the group of men and walked sharply in the direction of Mrs. Halliday's house, which she had learned to call home. 20 minutes' brisk walking brought her to the door, which happened to be open. Rose entered, rapidly ascended the stairs, and knocked at the door of Mrs. Halliday's room. "Come in," said that worthy old lady. Rose availed herself of the permission, but then Mrs. Halliday, who had not yet completed her toilette, saw what she believed to be a good-looking sailor boy enter her room. She gave a shrill scream and hastily threw her dress over her shoulders. "Don't you know me, Rose?" said our heroine.
"Lor me, and so it is, and oh, the state Jack's been in about you.
And where have you been? Which the dress it becomes you well, though fine feathers don't make fine birds, and I hope it's no harm, none of those masked balls and wickedness, because it's pale you are, my darling, and a little drop of brandy, though it is early in the morning, and such are courses I don't approve, and you haven't told me a bit about it yet." So ran on the worthy, kind-hearted, talkative old lady, patting Rose on the cheek as she spoke and holding her hand in her own. Rose commenced a narration of her adventures, but before she had half told of them, her strength gave way, and she burst into a flood of tears. "Bless you, my dear, don't fret," cried the old lady. "Your troubles are over now." Good old soul. Had Rose's troubles even begun? Oh, if she had known what a fearful fate awaited her, what dreadful end she was rapidly approaching. Well, that was quite a tale, wasn't it? One of the things I really appreciate about this dreadful, besides the fact that so much happens in each and every chapter, is how proactive Rose Mortimer is. Back in that age, most heroines basically just looked fetching and waited for a hero to rescue them. And although Rose does require a rescue a time or two, she's resourceful in a way that Victorian heroines seldom were. I mean, really, in this chapter, she literally shanks a guy and steals his boat. Absolute legend. In the next chapter, back at Mrs. Halliday's house, Rose tries to rest and recover from the terrors of the night and repair her tattered ballet dress in time for rehearsals. The dress is done just in time, and luckily there's a cab right outside the house. But wait, who's that man waiting with the cab driver? And why is the cab going so fast and recklessly through the foggy streets to the theater? No, to somewhere else. What's going on? We shall see. Before we move on to this week's Victorian short story of occult mystery, let's pause to appreciate one of the bits of poetical fervor that we've been handed down from the early Victorian era via one of the great old informal evening songbooks. This song comes from The Corinthian, an extensive collection of flash songs, slang, ditties, and rum chaunts, published in 1833 by J. Duncombe of Holborn, London. It's chock full of flash cant terms, so I've annotated the entire poem in the show notes so that you can follow along. Here we go. Moll Spriggins, or The Hundreds of Drury, a very popular slang chaunt, tune, "Oh, 'Tis Love." To the hundreds of Drury I write, and the rest of my flash companions, to the buttocks that padded all night, to pimps, whores, bawds, and their stallions, to those who were down in the whit, rattling their darbies with pleasure, who laugh at the rum culls they've bit, and now they are snacking the treasure. This time I expect to be nabbed, my duds they grow wondrous seedy. I pray you to send me some bub, a bottle or two of the needy. I beg you won't bring it yourself, the Harmon is at the Old Bailey. I'd rather you send it by half, for if that they twig ye, they'll nail ye. Moll Spriggins came here t'other night, she tipped such a jorum of diddle, garnish is the prisoner's delight, we footed away to the fiddle. Her fortunate diving did fail, for which she has changed habitation, but now the whore pads it in jail, and laughs at the fools of the nation. This time I expect no reprieve. The sheriffs came down with the warrants. An account now behind us we leave, of our birth, education, and parents. Our bolts are knocked off in the what? Our friends to die penitent pray us. The nubbing cull pops from the pit, and into the tumbret conveys us. Through the streets our slow wheels do move, the toll of the death bell dismays us. With nosegays we're decked and with gloves, so trim and so gay they array us. The passage all crowded we see, with maidens that move us to pity. Our air all admiring agree, such lads are not left in the city. Oh, then to the tree I must go, the judge hath so ordered the sentence. And then comes the gownsman, you know, and tells a dull tale of repentance. But the gullets we've tied very tight, we beg all spectators pray for us. Our peepers are hid from the sight, the ladder shoves off, then we moor us. Now it's time to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll duck directly into our weekly Victorian ghost story, an account of some strange disturbances in Ongar Street by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. Stick around. Welcome back to the second half of the weekly Sunday evening Penny Dreadful Hour. Now, where were we? Yes, moving on to our evening's Victorian short story of ghostly presences and sinister occulteries. This evening's Victorian ghost story is an account of some strange disturbances in Ongar Street by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, which was first published in 1851. While listening to it, keep in mind that it takes place in Dublin, was written by an Irish writer, and was published near the end of the Great Potato Famine. Daily experience for this author was probably haunted by specters. Le Fanu, at the outbreak of famine, was something of a rising star in Tory political circles, but that ended in 1847 when he joined what you might call an intra-party political insurrection against the government's indifference to the suffering of the Irish. By the time of the famine, Le Fanu had already established himself as basically the United Kingdom's answer to Edgar Allan Poe. One has to wonder what being surrounded by so much death for half a decade and so many untenanted ruins afterwards. Dublin, where he lived, wasn't as hard hit as the country counties, but more than 1 million Irish died of hunger over those 5 years. Like 1 out of every 7 people. Another 1 million emigrated. The whole country was like a bombed-out hulk for decades. As if that weren't enough, Le Fanu was a Protestant of Huguenot descent in a country whose ancient establishment was Catholic and medieval. It's hard to remember this today, but until Vatican II, many Protestants looked at Catholicism as a darksome, mysterious, global conspiracy cult type thing. It still carries a whiff of that legend, or at least that legend has some cultural potency. If you read the Da Vinci Code, you'll know what I mean. Being surrounded by those ruins of both buildings and cultures of unimaginable antiquity must have been pretty inspiring for a writer of Le Fanu's imagination and temperament. If ever there was a training regimen for a writer of ghostly and darksome tales, I guess this would have been it. I'm just glad I didn't have to walk his road. Today, Le Fanu is widely regarded as the best ghost story writer of his time. He's best known for having revolutionized vampire literature with Carmilla in 1872. Before Carmilla, well, vampires were like Varney. Afterwards, they were basically like Count Dracula. A model that would hold until the advent of Edward Cullen. All right, enough gabbling. Let's get on with this story now. An account of some strange disturbances in Ongar Street by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, 1851. Part 1 of 3 parts. Part 2 will be presented in next Sunday's show, and Part 3 the Sunday after that. It is not worth telling, this story of mine, at least not worth writing. Told, indeed, as I have sometimes been called upon to tell it to a circle of intelligent and eager faces lighted up by a good after-dinner fire on a winter's evening, with a cold wind rising and wailing outside and all snug and cozy within. It has gone off, though I say it who should not, indifferently well. But it is a venture to do as you would have me. Pen, ink, and paper are cold vehicles for the marvelous, and a reader decidedly a more critical animal than a listener. If, however, you can induce your friends to read it after nightfall, and when the fireside talk has run on for a while on the thrilling tales of shapeless terror, in short, if you will secure me the molia tempora fandi, I will go to my work and say my say with better heart. Well then, these conditions presupposed, I shall waste no more words, but tell you simply how it all happened. My cousin, Tom Ludlow, and I studied medicine together. I think he would have succeeded had he stuck to the profession, but he preferred the church, poor fellow, and died early, a sacrifice to contagion, contracted in the noble discharge of his duties. For my present purpose, I say enough of his character when I mention that he was of a sedate but frank and cheerful nature, very exact in his observance of truth, and not by any means like myself, of an excitable or nervous temperament. My uncle Ludlow, Tom's father, while we were attending lectures, purchased 3 or 4 old houses in Ongar Street, one of which was unoccupied. He resided in the country, and Tom proposed that we should take up our abode in the untenanted house so long as it should continue unlet, a move which would accomplish the double end of settling us nearer alike to our lecture rooms and to our amusements, and of relieving us from the weekly charge of rent for our lodgings. Our furniture was very scant, our whole equipage remarkably modest and primitive, and in short, our arrangements pretty nearly as simple as those of a bivouac. Our new plan was therefore executed almost as soon as conceived. The front drawing room was our sitting room, I had the bedroom over it, and Tom the back bedroom on the same floor, which nothing could have induced me to occupy. The house, to begin with, was a very old one. It had been, I believe, newly fronted about 50 years before, but with this exception, it had nothing modern about it. The agent who bought it and looked into the titles for my uncle told me that it was sold, along with much other forfeited property, at Chichester House, I think in 1702. It had belonged to Sir Thomas Hackett, who was Lord Mayor of Dublin in James II's time. How old it was then, I can't say, but at all events it had seen years and changes enough to have contracted all that mysterious and saddened air, at once exciting and depressing, which belongs to most old mansions. There had been very little done in the way of modernizing details, and perhaps it was better so, for there was something queer and bygone in the very walls and ceilings, in the shape of the doors and the windows, in the odd diagonal site of the chimney pieces, in the beams and ponderous cornices, not to mention the singular solidity of all the woodwork, from the banisters to the window frames, which hopefully defied disguise and would have emphatically proclaimed their antiquity through any conceivable amount of modern finery and finish. An effort had indeed been made to the extent of papering the drawing rooms, but somehow the paper looked raw and out of keeping, and the old woman who kept a little dirt pie of a shop in the lane and whose daughter, a girl of 52, was our solitary handmaid, coming in at sunrise and chastely receding again as soon as she had made all ready for tea in our state apartment, this woman, I say, remembered it when old Judge Horrocks, who, having earned a reputation of a particularly hanging judge, ended by hanging himself, as the coroner's jury found, under an impulse of temporary insanity with a child's skipping rope over the massive old banisters. I say, when he resided there, entertaining good company with fine venison and rare old port. In those halcyon days the drawing-rooms were hung with gilded leather, and I dare say cut a good figure, for they were really spacious rooms. The bedrooms were wainscoted, but the front one was not gloomy, and in it the coziness of antiquity quite overcame its somber associations. But the back bedroom, with its two queerly placed melancholy windows staring vacantly at the foot of the bed, and with a shadowy recess to be found in most old houses in Dublin like a large ghostly closet which, from congeniality of temperament, had amalgamated with the bedchamber and dissolved the partition, at night time this alcove, as our maid was wont to call it, had, in my eyes, an especially sinister and suggestive character. Tom's distant and solitary candle glimmered vainly into its darkness. There it was always overlooking him, always itself impenetrable, but this was only part of the effect. The whole room was, I can't tell how, repulsive to me. There was, I suppose, in its proportions and features a latent discord, a certain mysterious and indescribable relation which jarred indistinctly upon some secret sense of the fitting and the safe, and raised indefinable suspicions and apprehensions of the imagination. On the whole, as I began by saying, nothing could have induced me to pass a night alone in it. I had never pretended to conceal from poor Tom my superstitious weakness, and he, on the other hand, most unaffectedly ridiculed my tremors. The skeptic was, however, destined to receive a lesson, as you shall hear. We had not been very long in occupation of our respective dormitories when I began to complain of uneasy nights and disturbed sleep. I was, I suppose, the more impatient under this annoyance, as I was usually a sound sleeper and by no means prone to nightmares. It was now, however, my destiny, instead of enjoying my customary repose, every night to sup full of horrors. After a preliminary course of disagreeable and frightful dreams, my troubles took a definite form, and the same vision, without an appreciable variation in a single detail, visited me at least on average every second night in the week. Now this dream, nightmare, infernal vision, which you please, of which I was the miserable sport, was on this wise. I saw, or thought I saw, with the most abominable distinctness, though at the time in profound darkness, every article of furniture and accidental arrangement of the chamber in which I lay. This, as you know, is incidental to ordinary nightmare. Well, while in this clairvoyant condition, which seemed but the lighting up of the theatre in which was to be exhibited the monotonous tableau of horror which made my nights insupportable, my attention invariably became, I know not why, fixed upon the windows opposite the foot of my bed, and uniformly with the same effect a sense of dreadful anticipation always took slow but sure possession of me. I became somehow conscious of a sort of horrid but undefined preparation going forward in some unknown quarter and by some unknown agency for my torment, and after an interval, which always seemed to be of the same length, a picture suddenly flew up to the window, where it remained fixed as if by an electrical attraction, and my discipline of horror then commenced to last perhaps for hours. The picture thus mysteriously glued to the window panes was the portrait of an old man in a crimson-flowered silk dressing-gown, the folds of which I could now describe, with a countenance embodying a strange mixture of intellect, sensuality, and power, but withal sinister and full of malignant omen. His nose was hooked like the beak of a vulture, his eyes large, gray, and prominent, and lighted up with more than mortal cruelty and coldness. These features were surmounted by a crimson velvet cap, the hair that peeped from under which was white with age, while the eyebrows retained their original blackness. Well, I remember every line, hue, and shadow of that stony countenance, and well I may. The gaze of this hellish visage was fixed upon me, and mine returned it with the inexplicable fascination of nightmare for what appeared to me to be hours of agony. At last, the cock he crew, and away then flew the fiend who had enslaved me through the awful watches of the night, and harassed and nervous, I rose to the duties of the day. I can't say exactly why, but it may have been from the exquisite anguish and profound impressions of unearthly horror with which this strange phantasmagoria was associated, an insurmountable antipathy to describing the exact nature of my nightly troubles to my friend and comrade. Generally, however, I told him that I was haunted by abominable dreams, and, true to the imputed materialism of medicine, we put our heads together to dispel my horrors not by exorcism, but by a tonic. I will do this tonic justice, and frankly admit that the accursed portrait began to intermit its visits under its influence. What of that? Was this singular apparition, as full of character as of terror, therefore the creature of my fancy, or the invention of my poor stomach? Was it, in short, subjective, to borrow the slang of the day, and not the palpable aggression and intrusion of an external agent? That, good friend, as we both will admit, by no means follows. The evil spirit who enthralled my senses in the shape of that portrait may have been just as near me, just as energetic, just as malignant, though I saw him not. What means the whole moral code of revealed religion regarding the due keeping of our own bodies, soberness, temperance, etc.? Here is an obvious connection between the material and the invisible. The healthy tone of the system and its unimpaired energy may, for aught we can tell, guard us against influences which would otherwise render life itself terrific. The mesmerist and the electrobiologist will fail upon an average of 9 patients out of 10. So may the evil spirit. Special conditions of the corporeal system are indispensable to the production of certain spiritual phenomena. The operation succeeds sometimes fails, that is all. I found afterwards that my would-be skeptical companion had his troubles too, but of these I knew nothing yet. One night, for a wonder, I was sleeping soundly when I was roused by a step on the lobby outside my room, followed by the loud clang of what turned out to be a large brass candlestick, flung with all his force by poor Tom Ludlow over the banisters and rattling with a rebound down the second flight of stairs. And almost concurrently with this, Tom burst open my door and bounced into my room backward in a state of extraordinary agitation. I had jumped out of bed and clutched him by the arm before I had any distinct idea of my own whereabouts. There we were, in our shirts, standing before the open door, staring through the great old banister opposite at the lobby window, through which the sickly light of a clouded moon was gleaming. "What's the matter, Tom? What's the matter with you? What the devil's the matter with you, Tom?" I demanded, shaking him with nervous impatience. He took a long breath before he answered me, and then it was not very coherently.
"It's nothing at all. Did I speak? What did I say? Where's the candle, Richard? It's dark. I had a candle."
"Yes, dark enough," I said, "but what's the matter? What is it? Why don't you speak, Tom? Have you lost your wits? What is the matter?"
"The matter? Oh, it is all over. It must have been a dream. Nothing at all but a dream. Don't you think so? It could not be anything more than a dream."
"Of course," I said, feeling uncommonly nervous. It was a dream."
"I thought," he said, "there was a man in my room, and I jumped out of bed, and where's the candle?"
"In your room, most likely," I said. "Shall I go and bring it?"
No, stay here. Don't go. It's no matter. Don't I tell you it was all a dream? Bolt the door, Dick. I'll stay here with you. I feel nervous. So, Dick, like a good fellow, light your candle and open the window. I am in a shocking state."
I did as he asked me, and robing himself like Granwale in one of my blankets, he seated himself close beside my bed. Everybody knows how contagious is fear of all sorts, but more especially that particular kind of fear under which poor Tom was at that moment laboring. I would not have heard, nor I believe would he have recapitulated just at that moment for half the world the details of the hideous vision which had so unmanned him. "Don't mind telling me anything about your nonsensical dream, Tom," said I, affecting contempt, but really in a panic. "Let us talk about something else, but it is quite plain that this dirty old house disagrees with us both, and hang me if I stay here any longer to be pestered with indigestion and bad nights, so we may as well look out for lodgings, don't you think so, at once?" Tom agreed, and after an interval said,
"I have been thinking, Richard, that it is a long time since I saw my father, and I have made up my mind to go down tomorrow and return in a day or two, and you can take rooms for us in the meantime."
I fancied that this resolution, obviously the result of the vision which had so profoundly scared him, would probably vanish next morning with the damps and shadows of night. But I was mistaken. Off went Tom at the peep of day to the country, having agreed that so soon as I had secured suitable lodgings I was to recall him by letter from his visit to my Uncle Ludlow. Now, anxious as I was to change my quarters, it so happened, owing to a series of petty procrastinations and accidents, that nearly a week elapsed before my bargain was made and my letter of recall on the wing to Tom. And in the meantime, a trifling adventure or two had occurred to your humble servant, which, absurd as they now appear, diminished by distance, did certainly at the time serve to whet my appetite for change considerably. A night or two after the departure of my comrade, I was sitting by my bedroom fire, the door locked, and the ingredients of a tumbler of hot whiskey punch upon the crazed spider table, for as the best mode of keeping the black spirits and white, blue spirits and grey, with which I was environed, at bay, I had adopted the practice recommended by the wisdom of my ancestors and kept my spirits up by pouring spirits down. I had thrown aside my volume of anatomy and was treating myself by way of a tonic preparatory to my punch in bed to half a dozen pages of The Spectator when I heard a step on the flight of stairs descending from the attics. It was 2:00. The streets were silent as a churchyard. The sounds were therefore perfectly distinct. There was a slow, heavy tread, characterized by the emphasis and deliberation of age, descending by the narrow staircase from above. And what made the sound more singular, it was plain that the feet which produced it were perfectly bare, measuring the descent with something between a pound and a flop, very ugly to hear. I knew quite well that my attendant had gone away many hours before, and that nobody but myself had any business in the house. It was quite plain also that the person who was coming downstairs had no intention whatever of concealing his movements, but on the contrary appeared disposed to make even more noise and proceed more deliberately than was at all necessary. When the step reached the foot of the stairs outside my room, it seemed to stop, and I expected every moment to see my door open spontaneously and give admission to the original of my detested portrait. I was, however, relieved in a few seconds by hearing the descent renewed, just in the same manner upon the staircase leading down to the drawing-room, and thence, after another pause, down the next flight, and so on to the hall, whence I heard no more. Now, by the time the sound had ceased, I was wound up, as they say, to a very unpleasant pitch of excitement. I listened, but there was not a stir. I screwed up my courage to a decisive experiment, opened the door, and in a stentorian voice bawled over the banisters, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but a ringing of my own voice through the empty house. No renewal of the movement, nothing, in short, to give my unpleasant sensations a definite direction. There is, I think, something most disagreeably disenchanting in the sound of one's own voice under such circumstances, exerted in solitude and in vain. It redoubled my sense of isolation, and my misgivings increased on perceiving that the door, which I certainly thought I had left open, was closed behind me. In a vague alarm, lest my retreat should be cut off, I got again into my room as quickly as I could, where I remained in a state of imaginary blockade and very uncomfortable indeed until morning. Next night brought no return of my barefooted fellow-lodger, but the night following, being in my bed and in the dark, somewhere I suppose about the same hour as before, I distinctly heard the old fellow again descending from the garrets. This time I had had my punch, and the morale of the garrison was consequently excellent. I jumped out of bed, clutched the poker as I passed the expiring fire, and in a moment was upon the lobby. The sound had ceased by this time. The dark and chill were discouraging, and guess my horror when I saw, or thought I saw, a black monster, whether in the shape of man or bear I could not say, standing with its back to the wall in the lobby, facing me with a pair of great greenish eyes shining dimly out. Now I must be frank and confess that the cupboard which displayed our plates and cups stood just there, though at the moment I did not recollect it. At the same time, I must honestly say that, making every allowance for an excited imagination, I never could satisfy myself that I was made the dupe of my own fancy in this matter, for this apparition, after one or two shiftings of shape, as if in the act of incipient transformation, began, as it seemed, on second thoughts, to advance upon me in its original form. From an instinct of terror rather than courage, I hurled the poker with all my force at its head, and to the music of a horrid crash made my way into my room and double-locked the door. Then in a minute more I heard the horrid bare feet walk down the stairs, till the sound ceased in the hall as on the former occasion. If the apparition of the night before was an ocular delusion of my fancy sporting with the dark outlines of our cupboard, and if its horrid eyes were nothing but a pair of inverted teacups, I had at all events the satisfaction of having launched the poker with admirable effect, and in true fancy phrase knocked its 2 daylights into one, as the commingled fragments of my tea service testified. I did my best to gather comfort and courage from these evidences, but it would not do. And then, what could I say of those horrid bare feet and the regular tramp, tramp, tramp which measured the distance of the entire staircase through the solitude of my haunted dwelling, and at an hour when no good influence was stirring? Confound it, the whole affair was abominable. I was out of spirits and dreaded the approach of night. It came, ushered ominously in with a thunderstorm and dull torrents of depressing rain. Earlier than usual the streets grew silent, and by 12 o'clock nothing but the comfortless pattering of the rain was to be heard. To be continued in Part 2 next week. Well, you can see why this guy is so well regarded today. This is one of his earlier efforts, too. He gets better later, like we all do. In the next segment of the story, we'll learn the source of those barefoot footsteps. Mild spoiler, they're not really from footsteps, but our narrator gets no relief from learning what they really are. Then we get the real story of what it was that drove Tom, our narrator's roommate, to quit the premises so suddenly. Now let's lighten the mood a little bit with a visit to one of the old Victorian journals of comedy. These aren't as funny today as they were back in the 1840s because they tend to be peppered with contemporary pop cultural and political references that only the deepest diving scholar of early Victorian life can even catch today. But some of them can still be pretty amusing, and they give us a window into the amusements and humors of the age. This one is from Punch magazine. It came out in July 31st, 1841, and its headline is Poetry on an Improved Principle. Let me earnestly implore you, good Mr. Punch, to give publicity to a new invention in the art of poetry, which I desire only to claim the merit of having discovered. I am perfectly willing to permit others to improve upon it and bring it to that perfection of which I am delightedly aware it is susceptible. It is sometimes lamented that the taste for poetry is on the decline, that it is no longer relished, that the public will never again purchase it as a luxury. But it must be some consolation to our modern poets to know, as they no doubt do, for it is by this time notorious, that their productions really do a vast deal of service, that they are of a value for which they were never designed. They, many of them, have found their way into the pharmacopoeia, and are constantly prescribed by physicians as soporifics of rare potency. For instance, not poppy nor mandragora, nor all the drowsy syrups of the world, shall ever usher thee to that sweet sleep, to which man may be conducted by a few doses of Robert Montgomery's devil's elixir called Satan, or by a portion, or rather a potion, of Oxford.
Apollo, we know, was the god of medicine as well as of poetry. Behold, in this our bard his two divine functions equally mingled. But waiving this, of which it was not my intention to speak, let me remark that the reason why poetry will no longer go down with the public, as poetry, is that the whole framework is worn out. No new rhymes can be got at. When we come to a mountain, we are tolerably sure that a fountain is not very far off. When we see sadness, it leads at once to madness. To borrow is sure to be followed by sorrow, although it is said when poverty comes at the door, love flies out the window, a saying which seems to imply that poverty may sometimes enter at the chimney or elsewhere. Yet I assure you in poetry, the poor always come in and always go out at the door. My new invention has closed the door for the future against the vulgar crew of versifiers. A man must be original. He must write common sense, too. Hard exactions, I know, but it cannot be helped. I transmit you a specimen. Like all great discoveries, the chief merit of my invention is its simplicity. Here, then, we have a rencontre with a teetotaler. On going forth last night a friend to see, I met a man by trade a SNOB. Reeling along the path he held his way. Ho ho, quoth I, he's DRUNK. Lately, Johnny, since my baby left, do it almost every day. Oh, this is a different poem, isn't it? Okay, back on track. Then thus to him, were it not better far, you were a little SOBER, 'twere happier for your family, I guess, than playing off such rum RIGS. Besides, all drunkards, when policemen see 'em, are taken up at once by THEM. Me drunk, the cobbler cried, the devil trouble you. You want to kick up a blessed ROW. Now may I never wish to work for Hobie, if dram I've had the lying SNOB. I've just returned from a teetotal party. 12 on us, jammed in a spring CART. The man as lectured now was drunk, why bless ye. He sent home in a CHAISE. He'd taken so much lush into his belly, I'm blessed if he could TODDLE. A pair on him, hisself and his good lady. The gin had got into her HE80. My eye and Betty, what weak mortals we are. They said they took but ginger BEER. But as for me, I've stuck, 'twas rather ropey, all day to weak imperial POP. And now we've had this little bit of sparrin', just stand a QUARTER'n. Well, except for the usual end-of-episode Victorian dad jokes, that's it for today. I hope you will join me again for next show. It's a half-hour Twopenny Terrible Tuesday episode, in which we will start out with Chapter 6 of The Mysteries of London by George W.M. Reynolds, first published starting in 1844. Mysteries of London, by the way, was the single most widely read work of fiction in the United Kingdom in the 1800s. Don't be fooled by its anodyne name, it's really quite good. But you knew that. That's the beauty of quote-unquote low art like Penny Dreadfuls. It has to deliver the goods or people won't pay for it. After that, we'll explore one or two spicy Victorian supper club songs. These can get pretty naughty. If the episode has an explicit content tag on it, that'll be why. Plus, we'll patter more flash cant words and maybe get some other stuff too, and that's all coming your way in 2 nights at Dick Turpin's Scragging Hour, 5:37. That's 1737 military time, this coming Tuesday Eve. Before we sherry off, as usual, we've got 1 or 2 dorky old early Victorian dad jokes to share, courtesy of Joe Miller's Jests or the Wits Vade Mecum, the most famous collection of alleged wisecracks of the early 1800s. A gentleman was asking another how that poor devil S could live, now that my Lord T had turned him off. Upon his wits, said the other. That is living upon a slender stock indeed, replied the first. A country parson having divided his text under 22 heads, one of the congregation went out of the church in a great hurry, and being met by a friend, he asked him whither he was going. Home for my nightcap, answered the first, for I find we are to stay here all night. A very modest young gentleman of the county of Tipperary, having attempted many ways in vain to acquire the affections of a lady of great fortune, at last was resolved to try what could be done by the help of music, and therefore entertained her with a serenade under her windows at midnight, but she ordered her servant to drive him hence by throwing stones at him. Your music, my friend, said one of his companions, is as powerful as that of Orpheus, for it draws the very stones about you.
A certain senator, who it may be is not esteemed the wisest man in the house, has a frequent custom of shaking his head when another speaks, which, giving offense to a particular person, he complained of the affront, but one who had been long acquainted with him assured the house it was only an ill habit that he had got, for though he would oftentimes shake his head, there was nothing in it. A gentleman having lent a guinea for 2 or 3 days to a person whose promises he had not much faith in was very much surprised to find that he punctually kept his word with him. The same gentleman, being some time after desirous of borrowing the like sum, "No," said the other, "you have deceived me once, I am resolved you shan't do it a second time." My Lord Chief Justice Holt had sent, by his warrant, one of the French prophets, a foolish sect that started up in his time, to prison, upon which Mr. Lacy, one of their followers, came one day to my lord's house and desired to speak with him. The servants told him he was not well and saw no company that day. "But tell him," said Lacy, "I must see him, for I come to him from the Lord." Which being told the Chief Justice, he ordered him to come in, and asked him his business. "I come," said he, "from the Lord, who has sent me to thee, and would have thee grant a nulli prosequi for John Atkins, whom thou hast cast into prison." "Thou art a false prophet," answered my lord, "and a lying knave, for if the Lord had sent thee, it would have been to the Attorney General. He knows it is not in my power to grant a nulli prosequi." That's it for us. Thanks for joining us. Our theme music is a version of Golden Slippers, a minstrel show song written by James A. Bland in 1879. This version is by Seattle old-time band $4 Shoe. For more of their music, see $4shoe.com. That's the number 4, the word dollar, and the word shoe, all crammed together into one word and all lowercase. The Penny Dreadful Variety Hour is a creation of Pulp-Lit Productions. For more details, see pennydread.com. To get in touch with me, hit me up at finn@pennydread.com. Thanks again for joining me, Manabs. It is now time for us to pike off like we spotted a red waistcoat down the lane. For the Penny Dreadful Show, I'm Finn J.D. John, signing off. And now, go out there and fill up the rest of the week with all that is rum-teak-tum with the chill-off. Bye now.